Well, it's very exciting to be at the technology conference because I tested my laptop yesterday and everything worked fine. And I plugged in my laptop this morning and I had a blue screen. And for 20 minutes, every time I plug in the beamer with all adapters, I had a blue screen. Welcome at the technology conference. Because this is exact what teachers feel when they have to use technology. The fear, it won't work, it will break down. And now I have to fear this is not my laptop. So I'm not sure if everything is working. But I'm happy. I get used to wear a ribbon with my conference name tag. And I also found the perfect souvenir for myself yesterday in Amsterdam because I'm kind of the conference duck presenting. So I have this is me. And I already learned 3 things, at least 3 things in this conference. First, I learned disruption is everywhere. Have you seen the tree outside? Yes, that's one thing. We had a keynote telling us disruption, and yes, there is disruption. Then I had to learn a second thing, change is fast. Because did you see the street lamp beside the tree? You saw it, yes, but it was gone when I wanted to take a photo. Because I had the idea 24 hours later, street lamp was already gone. And third thing is disruption can also destroy technology. Not only the street lamp, but also the bicycle. So these are 3 things I already learned, and I hope we all will learn more things. But I will come back to the topic of my talk, and I'm not sure it's a dangerous thing, not only about technology failure, but also Paul Kirchner told us, it's the method, stupid. And I'm going to talk about the tool. And I'm going to talk about a very traditional tool. I'm going to talk about books, textbooks. And I'm not sure if this is a good thing. But I'm working for schools, so I won't talk about higher education today. And if you talk about schools, augmented reality, virtual reality, flipped classroom, that's not the daily business of school. The daily business of schools are textbooks. So if you want to improve school, you should take a look at textbooks and probably about the future of textbooks. Because teachers, they don't depend their work on the curriculum, mostly they depend on textbooks. And so we should have a look how textbooks might change. And if we take a step back, it's probably not only school that is based on books, but we could say, simplified, books have shaped today's society. Because if we look at humanity in the long run, you have several epochs. You have the spoken language, you have the written language, and then you have the printing press. And there are some experts saying that every time a new communication media was introduced to humanity, everything changed. Because humanity was overwhelmed by the new possibilities. We could speak. We could write down what we are talking about. And then we could print and distribute massively what happened in the world. And every time society changed, how economy worked changed, and so on. And we saw it also in a slide this week in a keynote. This was the way copying was done before there was the printing press, because someone was talking and the others were writing. And now for the next time, we have a new tool introduced, the computer. And probably, some experts say, the computer will change society as much as the printing press changed society. And so perhaps we should have a look at the functions of a computer. What are the main functions of a computer? The computer mainly can do 3 things. He can collect massively and save data. You all know big data, and most of the data we have today was collected the last 10 years and so on. That's all well known. But there's another thing. The traditional media just reproduced what you put in. The same came out. Printing press, just copying. The computer is different because he will process the information, the data, and aggregate it, sort it, visualize it, and you get something, not the same thing out of the computer you put in. So that's a new quality of a medium that changes things. And third thing, you can easily distribute without massive cost all you did with the computer. So we have three main functions: collecting, processing, aggregating, and distributing information. And for another time, we have a massive information overload, and society is complaining about this information overload the same as it was complaining when the printing press was introduced or when writing was introduced. The ancient Greek philosophers said, well, people don't know how to talk anymore at an audience because they're always looking on their sheets they have. And now we have much more information. You can't read anything, all things that is in the world. Now, what happens if we put these three functions of a computer on textbooks? What happens if we mix the potentials of a normal textbook with the possibilities of a computer? And as I'm on a tech conference, you're the experts. What do you think, in your opinion and your expert view, is the biggest potential of digital adding or mixing or mingling with textbooks? Please discuss with your neighbor for 1 minute, where do you see the biggest potential of digital textbooks? So thank you very much. I think I could stop my keynote because you would all talk for an hour about the potentials, and probably you would learn more than listening to me, but I will continue. And it was interesting, when I was looking at your faces and I saw about the potentials, there was a lightening up, and you didn't see just the textbook, but the new possibilities of a textbook it has when it's digital. So what I heard from you, and I assumed, so it's already on my slides, there are some simple potentials of digital textbooks. There is less weight. Yes, that's important. We heard it on a keynote on Monday that the weight of the books is a problem. We have more space, so as an author you always have enough space because the book has no end. You can add more. It's easier to distribute. It's easy to do a full text search. It's easy to update, so when there's something new, you can push it afterwards. You don't print it and it's gone. And you can, as a teacher, add things. And some important, it has a better accessibility. And that's one thing I think, yes, that's an important thing about the tool, because it's not about the method. If you're blind, with a digital book, you can have it read to you and so on. So I think these are the small potentials. And now for the big ones, if we take these three functions of the computer, collecting and saving data, processing data and distributing data, and we put this together with a book, then we have three dimensions where digital books have more potentials than normal textbooks. Because if you add or mix digital with textbook, then you get multimedia. If you add automation to a book, then you have human-computer interaction. The book can answer questions if the problem space is closed. Then you can have tasks where the computer will react on what the student does. And third thing, connectivity. I heard it over there. That's important stuff. You can connect people by digital books because over the network they can connect. You can have, theoretically, if the experts have enough time, you can have experts in your textbook, or you can have students interact over the textbook. There are many possibilities, only one if you take it further. If you have interactivity, you can collect this data, what happens, and then you get learning analytics, and so on. So we have a multitude of potentials and also limits of digital textbooks. In a recent report, we collected all the potentials, and there are much of them. And if we're in a community like this, then we have to distinguish all these potentials in detail and write papers and measure and look if learning gets better if you have these potentials. But if you discuss with government or with school principals, it's overwhelming. You can't talk about 17 potentials of digital school books. So in our report, we boiled down the potentials of digital school books to be able to discuss it with politicians and publishers of textbooks. Because the first level is a traditional school book. It's already produced digitally, but it's printed and distributed on paper. The second level is you have a conventional book, but you have digital editions, or you have a digital edition of the textbook. And in Switzerland, publishers say from themselves, yes, we have digital books, because these are digital books. But it's still books, with an end, with a beginning, with an end, with page numbers. And the thinking is book, chapters. On the next level, you don't think printed first, but you think digital first. So you have still a beginning and an end, but probably you won't have page numbers. You have a digital space. But you still have one object, and that's the digital textbook. And then on the fourth level, you have no boundaries, because you just have an interconnected thing with content in it, but open, you have APIs, so there could be a teacher from India helping Swiss students when he doesn't get it with the textbook, and the Indian teacher already knows what is in the textbook. You can have links outside, you can put things in the textbook, so it's not a textbook anymore. And you can't say if it's an LMS or a PLE, it's just a digital space with content in it. And we found this model, this simplified model, very helpful if you're talking on a political, on a government level about digital textbooks. Because then you can say, well, level 2 has this advantages and that disadvantages, but it's quite another thing if you're talking about level 4. But still, this is, I think, the lab view of digital textbooks we have. I think you will find yourself somewhere in this sphere about the potentials and limits of digital textbooks. But this is how it works in our labs. And this is not quite the whole story. Because in my view, I think digital textbooks, if you look at it in practice, it's like an iceberg in the sea. You only see one half, the technical side of textbooks. And in the second half of my talk, I would like to talk about the context we are in. Because we at Edmedia, we mostly do prototypes, digital potentials. We tell things it could work, and yes, it works in our lab, but it's quite a different thing to have this working in a broad field in the schools in your country. And so I would like to invite you a second time to discuss with your neighbor, in the best case from another country, how in your home country, do you know how school books get into your school? Who decides? Who pays? What are the rules? Is it complicated? Is it easy? Please share with your neighbors. Do you know in your country how school books arrive in school? So thank you another time. I see I could just stop and drink a coffee and you would be fine talking. I'll have a coffee outside and you can continue talking. I saw my question was too narrow, and I was aware of that, because some people answered the question to me, well, the school books never get to the schools because of various reasons, because there is not enough money, or there are logistic problems, or anything else. So I'm aware that this is a question: if the textbooks get to the school, what are the difficulties, what are the problems that we have in this context? And when I was listening to you, I was happy that you said the things I already had on my prepared slides again. So I have 4 different contexts identified. What are the local contexts you have to look at and keep in mind if you discuss about school books or textbooks in school? First is the political context. Or first, for all 4 contexts, we have 2 considerations. Can we go back 1 slide? Yes. All slides are online. You'll see it on the last slide. There will be the address. So sometimes when you discuss with people about textbooks, they say, well, it's quite simple. You just have to look at the music industry or the film industry, and there you have the business model, and that's no problem. Publishers have to do the same as in music industry and film industry, or they will die. And then we have to tell them, well, school books are not quite like normal books. There are some differences. And the second thing, getting digital will change some things. And in the next slides, I will have these 2 considerations on every aspect: political, economic, and so on. So if we look at the political context, we have to say school books are not normal books, because I had on one of my first slides the saying that for teachers, school books are more important than the curriculum. But government wants to control what happens in school. Therefore, there is a curriculum. But if teachers don't look at the curriculum, in Switzerland there is research saying that a normal teacher looks at the curriculum every 2 years. Most teachers look at the textbook. And their teaching is linked with the textbook. So, as a consequence, government wants to control textbooks. And it's different in every country. Even in the German-speaking part of Europe, it's different in every country how textbooks are controlled. But now we get a problem if there is a digital world. Because in a digital world, there are networks. There is something called internet, where you can get content without government control. And that's a problem for government. So perhaps government will lose control. Because if you have an open website, what can government do? But perhaps government will adapt and have rules for digital content. And we have to be aware of that. There is a parallel movement, not linked to digitalization, that in business and in government, we have a change from input control in management to output control. We have management by objectives. We don't control what's going into the system, but we're controlling what's coming out of the system. You also have that in education. You have in Europe PISA, you have all these measurements. What is the student outcome? And if the government wants to control what happens in school, and there is learning analytics, it could be that government want to have a look at learning analytics data. And that will be interesting, what happens if textbooks become a form of control what happens in schools because you have learning analytics. And that depends from country to country if this is a problem or not, but you have to be aware of that. Government could want to have an eye on learning analytics data. Second thing, legal context. First, textbooks are not normal books. Schools often have more rights, special permissions to use books. In a school context, in Switzerland, you're allowed to do more with a book than outside of school. But in a traditional way, this is only valid if you're in the school building or even in the classroom. And now the problem begins. Because if you have a digital world, there are LMS and personal learning environments. And they're not inside the school building. And they're open probably for more than one class or more than one school. And then it's difficult with existing law in Switzerland. Is it allowed to do things on a learning platform that is open for more than one school? And so that's one easy question for lawmakers to change law to adapt to these possibilities. But there are more problems coming on the legal side, because in the internet age we have Web 2.0, we have a remix culture. What happens if you tell students not only to consume a textbook, but probably in language education, what about writing a blog post about the story you read in the textbook? And the blog posting is open to the public. At the moment in Switzerland, it's not allowed for most textbooks in language education to use the pictures on a public blog. And so public production of stories out of the textbooks is not allowed. That's also quite simple. You could instruct publishers to allow to use the images, but we have other problems. What about if teachers and students begin to produce content that is reused in the textbook on level 4, where you don't only have a one-side publishing, but content gets back, and the teacher can enhance, and the students can enhance, and other students could use. Then you have the copyright problem. That's one thing. But you also have the privacy problem. What about when students start to post photos of themselves or classmates into the textbook? And you have problem of free speech and hate speech and so on, and you have the problem of data security, and as a publisher, you also have the problem of availability. If you're a publisher and you print a print book, you print it, you sell it, and you forget it, because the book is in the school. If you're a publisher of digital books, you have to deliver this book for amount of time. If the school is 3 years and you sold a digital book, the book has to be available for 3 years. What happens if the company doesn't exist anymore after 2 years? And the website is shut down and the textbook is away. So there are amount of legal questions we have to answer. And as we heard yesterday and on Monday, legal situation differs in all of our countries. Next thing, economic context. Same answer as before, it's not like film and music business. Because in film and music business, you have individual customers buying or renting your film or video, but in some school levels, you have a compulsory consumption. The school has to buy, or the publisher knows that students have to buy the book. So the publisher can calculate other as a private publisher of normal books. That's one difference. On the other side, it's a partially closed market. Because if you have government allowing some books and not allowing other books, it's not an open market like film industry. And this will change. You have here some of the laws of the digital world. I think you know most of the buzzwords. And economic models will change in a digital world. If you, for example, if you don't buy the textbook, but you lend it or you pay a fee for amount of time, something change. And publishers have to adapt to all these kind of economic business models. And they're not used to it. They're used to calculate, I produced this book, I'll sell it for 3 years, and then it's gone. And here are quite new business models publishers have to adopt, and also government has to adapt. They can't plan, we'll buy books and we use it for 5 years, but they have to pay annual fees and so on. So they're different from country to country, things will also change. And here comes the model in being helpful, because on the first levels, level 2 and level 3, well, some things stay the same. But on level 4, it gets quite different. So you have to discuss with publisher and government on which level of digital books are we talking, because all these business models change from level to level. So this is the economic side, the context, and the last thing, technical context. You're all aware of that. You have different things, you have different systems, you have to look what are the devices of the students, what is the school equipment, what is the cloud equipment the country has, the school has, and so on. And it's not easy. These are also new questions to publishers, because before you could just sell a book, and you had one book, and it worked everywhere. And now you have several operating systems, you have changing operating systems. That's also something new. It could be that the publisher has to change his textbook after 2 years because Apple and Microsoft and Google decide they changed their operating system and the APA changes. So they have to calculate differently, and they have to have other project structures when producing and maintaining textbooks. So this is a short overview over the 4 contexts we identified in our report. You have to be aware of when you're talking about bringing textbooks out to the schools. And these questions are answered different in every country, and not only different in every country. I could have asked this question in Switzerland, because although Switzerland is a very small country in the middle of Europe, you won't believe it, we have 26 solutions how to solve this. Because in Switzerland, it's not the country who decides over education, it's the 26 states. And we have 26 different data protection laws in Switzerland. A bit problematic in a digital globalized world. So for this reason, to start discussion between politicians and government and principals, we tried to write a report for the situation of Switzerland. And this report is open, it's free, you can download it, but it's only in German. But there are many icons in it, so you can look at it as a picture book. But I don't think it's very useful for you, because it's for the Swiss context. And I won't say, please read this report, but probably in your own country, you have to write a similar report for your situation, looking at all the factors, not only on the technical ones, but also on the context. What we did to foster a discussion with politicians and government and so on, we made up 6 scenarios. How could the textbook publishing world work in 2030 or 35? And we had quite different provoking scenarios. So for one, it would be, what about if the government would fund open educational resources? That would be, yes, there is quality. Maybe there are publishers producing open educational resources, but they have to publish it open and freely. That would be one scenario for Switzerland. Another thing, what about if we do nothing, and the public company from a foreign country comes and says, well, it worked with videos, it will work with textbooks. We have a flat rate for textbooks. But then Swiss government loses control, because you have a foreign country saying, what are the textbooks coming in on this distribution website? The opposite would be, what if Switzerland would decide to build an own store for textbooks? Would Switzerland be technically up-to-date enough to provide such a platform that is equal to the possibilities big tech companies give? Is this a possible solution, or will such a store always be technically outdated compared to what the big tech companies can provide? So this has to be a discussion in Switzerland. Other possibility, we could have only one state or country publishing company. Bring all together. In Switzerland, we have about 5 or 6 publishing companies at least. Is this feasible for such a small country in a globalized world to have competition with 6 companies? Or do we have one government company? Or is that the problem if government does it and not the free market? This is a political discussion we have to have. Other possibilities. We hear much about open education resources. Why not pay teachers some amount of money to produce open educational resources, and they're obligated to publish it on a public platform? Do we need textbooks in the future? Is it important that one author writes it from the beginning to the end? Or could we have just a bunch of material aggregated, tagged, rated on a website, and we would have Swiss Edupedia OER developed by teachers because they know how to do textbooks? The authors of textbooks and the publisher wouldn't agree to this scenario, but you have to discuss it. Last scenario, what about if the government interest on data is so big that the whole discussion in 10 years will focus on data? There will be a government API for the government to control what happens in school. And so these are just 6 scenarios we built and we discussed with all stakeholders. And I would like to invite you to think such scenarios in your country. They will look different, but you have to discuss it on a provocative and boiled down level to get all stakeholders on board. And one last thing, it's not enough, and you have to remind politicians to invest in one aspect. We have here an illustration of the minimal principle, or the law of the minimum. If you have the best tablets, the best textbooks, but the teachers aren't prepared, it won't work. If you have the best prepared teachers, the best textbooks, but the tablets don't work, it won't work at all. So you have to look, when you do something on a political level, don't optimize just one thing. You have to look that all aspects are, that you look at all aspects at the same time, because the least developed aspect will determine how far your project will get. And so I have 2 take-home messages. When you're talking about digital textbooks in the broad, bringing it to school, mind the context. It's not only about technical factors, about media factors, education technology, didactical factors, but also the other aspects you have with digital textbook. And second take-home message, mind the minimum. Don't just do only one thing in one direction, but we have to do the whole thing. And then, if we do that, at some time, we will not only have this kind of digital textbook, but we get the whole spectrum of the digital textbook. Thank you very much.